The office had fallen into silence, the kind of silence that only came after everyone else had gone. The overhead lights were dimmed, leaving the floor bathed in a soft, golden glow. Outside, Boston's streets shimmered with the glow of headlights and street lamps, but inside, it felt as though the whole world had shrunk to one small, quiet space. Emma sat at her desk, finishing the last page of her report. The rhythmic tapping of her keyboard filled the air, steady and controlled, as if by keeping her hands busy, she could silence the storm in her mind. She told herself she would go home as soon as she printed the file. She told herself she would walk out the door, drive back to Mark, and slip into the life that was waiting for her. But deep down, she knew she was delaying something else, something inevitable. She didn't hear Daniel's footsteps at first, but she felt the shift in the air, the way her body always did when he was near. A faint warmth at the edge of her awareness, a pull she could neither ignore nor explain. "You shouldn't always be the last one here," his voice said softly from the doorway. Emma looked up, startled, though not surprised. There he was, leaning casually against the frame, his tie loosened, his jacket draped over one arm. His expression was calm, but his eyes held something else, something she had learned to recognize but never dared to name aloud. She forced a small smile, "And yet, here you are too." He stepped into the room, the sound of his shoes muffled against the carpet. For a moment, he didn't say anything more. He simply stood there as though giving her time to breathe, to prepare for what they both knew was coming. Emma's hands stilled on the keyboard. The silence stretched between them, heavy, filled with all the unspoken words that had gathered over weeks of glances and lingering moments. Finally, Daniel broke it. His voice was low, steady, almost too careful. "Emma, I can't keep pretending." "Not anymore." Her pulse quickened, though she tried to keep her face calm. "Pretending what?" She whispered, though she already knew. "That I don't feel this," he said, taking a slow step closer. His gaze never wavered. "That I don't think about you when I shouldn't. That I don't wait for these moments when it's just us." Emma swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. "Daniel, I know you're promised to someone else," he went on, his voice tight with restraint. "I know this isn't fair. Not to you, not to him. I've tried to stay away, to keep it professional, to bury it. But every time I see you, it gets harder. And tonight I can't hold it in anymore." Emma's heart pounded. His words cracked open the truth she had been fighting, the truth she had been too afraid to admit even to herself. She wanted to stop him, to remind him of her engagement, of the life she already had. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something that silenced her arguments. Honesty, pure, unguarded honesty. "I'm in love with you," Daniel said finally. The words falling into the quiet like stones into still water. Emma felt the air rush from her lungs. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. She stared at him, her mind racing with everything she should say, everything she should feel. But her heart betrayed her, because beneath the fear, beneath the guilt, there was something else, something that trembled in her chest like a long-forgotten flame coming back to life. "Daniel," she whispered again, her voice breaking this time. He took another step. Closer, though he kept a careful distance, as though he knew one wrong move could shatter everything. "I'm not asking you for anything you don't want to give. I'm not asking you to leave him or to change your life. I just need you to know, because pretending I don't love you is killing me." Tears burned at the corners of Emma's eyes. She turned away, staring at the glow of her laptop screen as though it could anchor her. But the words followed her, wrapping around her, pulling her toward a truth she could no longer ignore. At home, she had a man who loved her, a man who had given her years of loyalty, stability, comfort, a man who had asked for her hand and to whom she had said yes, and yet here she was, trembling in an empty office, moved by the confession of another man. It wasn't supposed to be. "This way, I can't do this," she whispered, her voice so faint she wasn't sure if he heard it. Daniel didn't argue. He simply nodded, his jaw tightening as though holding back words he wanted desperately to say. "I know," he murmured. "And if this is the last time we ever talk about it, I'll respect that." But I couldn't keep it inside anymore. Emma finally turned to face him, her eyes glistening with tears. "You've changed everything," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I don't even know who I am when I'm around you." For the first time, his composure cracked. Pain flickered across his face, but so did something else, hope. "Then at least I know I'm not alone in this," he said quietly. The room seemed to close in around them, the air heavy with everything unsaid. Emma's heart ached with the weight of choice between loyalty and desire. Between the safe life she had built and the uncertain one that called to her, she thought of Mark, of the trust in his eyes, of the home they had shared. She thought of Daniel, of the way he made her feel alive, seen, desired. And she realized that no matter what she chose, nothing would ever be the same again. Her hands trembled as she closed her laptop. The soft click of the lid echoing in the silence. She rose from her chair slowly, her legs unsteady. Daniel stepped back, giving her space, but his eyes never left hers. "I should go," she whispered. He nodded. "I'll walk you to your car." They moved through the darkened office together, the silence between them louder than any words. At the door, Emma hesitated, her hand on the handle. She turned to him, her voice soft, filled with everything. She couldn't say, "I don't know what happens next," she confessed. Daniel's eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "Neither do the first, but whatever happens, you'll know the truth." And with that, Emma stepped out into the cool night air. Her heart torn in two, her world forever changed. Because once the truth is spoken, it cannot be taken back. And she knew deep down that she would never forget the way Daniel looked at her when he said he was in love with her, and as she drove home that night, Emma realized nothing would ever be the same again. He straightened, offering her a small, almost sad smile. "I'll let you get back to your work." And just like that, he walked away, leaving her drowning in the silence he left behind. Emma sat frozen, staring at the empty space where he had been moments before. Her heart was in turmoil, torn between loyalty and longing. She wanted to dismiss what had just happened as nothing, a fleeting mistake. But she couldn't, because for the first time in years, someone had looked at her and seen more than just the dependable fiancé, the reliable employee, the woman who always had everything under control. Daniel had seen her, and now, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't forget it. That night, as Emma drove home through the quiet streets, she replayed the conversation over and over in her mind. Mark greeted her with his usual warmth, asking about her day, and she answered with the same careful smile. But inside, she was somewhere else back in that office, with Daniel's voice echoing in her memory. "Sometimes I wait for these moments. When it's just us. Do you notice that?" Yes, she noticed, more than she ever wanted to admit. And from that night on, the line between what was right and what was irresistible began to blur. The days that followed were both ordinary and impossible. To everyone else, Emma seemed the same, typing away at her desk, sipping her coffee, answering emails with practiced calm. But inside, she felt like she was standing on shifting ground. Daniel hadn't spoken of that night again. He didn't repeat his confession, didn't press, didn't corner her. On the surface, he was the same respectful colleague, professional and steady. Yet every glance carried a new weight now. Every small interaction was filled with a silent awareness that Emma couldn't escape. She tried to convince herself it was nothing. After all, he hadn't done anything wrong, had only told her the truth. But the problem was that she couldn't unhear it, couldn't unfeel it. His words echoed in her mind during meetings, during lunch breaks, even late at night when she lay beside Mark in their shared bed. Mark noticed. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Mark reached across and touched her hand. His voice was gentle, but his eyes searched hers. You been quiet lately? Distracted? Is everything okay at work? Emma forced a smile, shaking her head. Just a lot on my plate. Reports, deadlines, you know how it is. Mark nodded, though his brow furrowed with concern. He didn't push, but Emma felt the guilt tighten in her chest. He trusted her completely. He had no reason not to. For years, she had been his constant, his safe place. And now, here she was, hiding a secret she couldn't even admit to herself at night. While Mark dozed off beside her, Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the life they had built together, the shared apartment, the weekends spent with friends, the wedding plans carefully laid out on the calendar. Mark was dependable, loving everything she thought she had ever wanted. And yet, the thought of Daniel's voice, low and unguarded, sent her heart racing in a way she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't fair, to Mark, to herself, to anyone. But the truth was undeniable. Daniel had awakened something in her. At the office, the tension only grew. Daniel never crossed a line, but his presence alone unsettled her. When he leaned over to help her with a project, she could feel the heat of his closeness. When he spoke in meetings, his eyes would flicker toward her, just for a second. As though reminding her of what lingered between them, Emma began to dread the late evenings, most of all not because she disliked them, but because she knew she craved them. She found herself staying longer, telling herself it was for work, but deep down she knew it was because of him. The way his voice softened when most people had left. The way he lingered by her desk without saying much, as though simply existing in the same quiet space was enough. One Wednesday evening, the office was nearly empty when Emma gathered her things. Daniel passed by holding a stack of files. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment time seemed to still. He gave her the smallest of smiles, polite, but layered with meaning, and then he walked on. Nothing more. Nothing less, yet that simple. Moments stayed with her all night. She tried to bury it under routine. She cooked dinner with Mark. She laughed at a television show. She even called her mother to chat. But in the silence afterward, she found herself remembering Daniel's smile, steady eyes. It's the way he made her feel, as though he was waiting for her to admit something she didn't dare say. The battle inside her grew heavier each day. One part of her clung to loyalty, to the safe love she had built with Mark. He was her history, her family's choice, her future, or at least the future she had once imagined for herself. But the other part of her longed for something different. The way Daniel looked at her made her feel alive, wanted, as though someone had finally seen the woman beneath the layers of responsibility and routine. Emma began to notice. Often she compared them. Mark's conversations were predictable, filled with talk of plans and bills and schedules. Daniel's words, though few, carried weight, as though each one was chosen carefully. Mark kissed her with familiarity. Daniel hadn't kissed her at all, yet his presence alone sent shivers down her spine. It wasn't right. She knew it wasn't. But knowing didn't stop the longing. One evening, as she and Mark walked home from a dinner with friends, he slipped his arm around her shoulders. "You're quiet again," he said softly. Emma shook her head quickly. Just tired. But inside, her heart twisted. Tired wasn't the truth. The truth was that she was fighting a war with herself, a war she wasn't sure she could win. Back at work, Daniel seemed to sense her struggle. He never pushed, never asked for more than she could give. His silence spoke volumes. It was as though he was waiting for the day she would break, for the moment she would finally choose. Emma dreaded that moment. She prayed it would never come, but deep down, she knew it was only a matter of time. And then came Friday. The office buzzed with the usual end-of-week chatter. People made weekend plans, gathered their things, and left early with laughter on their lips. By 6 o'clock, most of the building was empty. Emma stayed behind, finishing a report she couldn't bring herself to leave undone as she typed. She felt it, the shift in the air, the awareness of being watched. She looked up, and there, Was Daniel standing in the doorway of the conference room? His eyes fixed on her. He didn't move. He didn't speak. But the look in his eyes told her everything. She needed to know. He was still waiting, waiting for the right moment, waiting for when no one else was around, waiting for her. Emma's breath caught, and she realized the unspoken battle inside her was reaching its breaking point, and that Friday night, fate gave him the chance he had been waiting for. Emma sat at her desk, the soft hum of the office surrounding her. Phones rang, keyboards clicked, conversations rose and fell. But in her little corner of the floor, she often felt invisible. She didn't mind it, really. She liked her quiet space, her stack of neatly arranged files, and the comfort of routine. At 28, she had a steady life, a fiancé waiting at home, and plans that felt safe, predictable. But then there was Daniel. He worked just 2 rows down, tall and calm, with a presence that was hard to ignore. At first, she barely noticed him. He was the new hire, polite with everyone, professional, always on time. But over the weeks, Emma began to see patterns in the way he moved. How his footsteps slowed when he passed her desk. How he paused for a moment longer than necessary to ask if she needed help. How his eyes would linger just long enough to send a ripple of awareness through her. It wasn't something anyone else noticed. To the others, Daniel was just another coworker. But to Emma, his glances carried meaning. She told herself it was nothing. She was engaged, after all. Mark, her fiancé, had been in her life for nearly a decade. He was stable, dependable, the kind of man her family adored. Their wedding date was set for spring. She should have been counting down the months with excitement. And yet, in the quiet moments at her desk, she felt something she couldn't quite name, something that stirred when Daniel's shadow passed by. Emma wasn't naive. She knew the danger of imagination, of letting her mind wander where it shouldn't. But there was something about Daniel's silence that unsettled her. He never flirted openly, never said anything that could be taken as inappropriate. Instead, he seemed to wait. For what? She wasn't sure. For her to look up. For her to acknowledge the unspoken current between them. One afternoon, while the rest of the office was buzzing about an upcoming client presentation, Emma felt his presence again. She looked up to find Daniel at the printer across the aisle, his hand resting on the stack of papers, his eyes fixed on her. Not in a bold, obvious way, no. His gaze was softer, questioning, almost careful. Their eyes met, and in that instant, Emma felt her breath hitch. It lasted only a second before he turned away, but the effect lingered. Her heart beat faster, and she stared at her computer screen, unable to focus on the words. Why did it matter? Why did she care? At home that evening, Mark was waiting, as he always did, with dinner warming in the oven and the television playing softly in the background. He kissed her cheek, asked about her day, and she answered with a smile that felt practiced. She wanted to tell him everything, that she was distracted, unsettled, but how could she? What would he think if she admitted that a man at work had made her feel something she couldn't explain? So she kept quiet. The days passed, and the quiet glances continued. Sometimes, when the office was full, it felt like their connection was invisible, hidden beneath layers of noise and routine. But when the building began to empty in the evenings, Emma felt the shift. Daniel moved differently, then closer, slower, his voice softer when he spoke. It was never much. A comment about the weather, a question about her project, a shared laugh over a printer jam. But each small exchange carried weight. As though he was waiting for her to recognize what was left unsaid, Emma began to notice how much she anticipated those moments. She found herself lingering at her desk longer than necessary, her eyes flicking toward the clock, wondering if tonight would be the night he spoke more openly. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She reminded herself of her engagement ring, the symbol of her commitment to Mark. She twisted it on her finger sometimes, as though the motion could ground her, anchor her back to reality. But when Daniel's voice drifted across the quiet office, Her resolve wavered. One evening, she stayed late to finish a report. Most of the lights were off, casting the office in a soft glow. She was lost in her work when she felt it's a subtle awareness of not being alone. She looked up, and there he was, leaning against the doorway of the conference room across the hall, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The silence stretched between them, heavy and electric, until Emma finally looked away. That night, as she walked to her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Daniel wasn't just a coworker anymore. He was a presence in her life, one that she couldn't ignore, no matter how hard she tried, and deep down, Emma knew the truth she was afraid to admit. Daniel was waiting for the right moment, waiting for when no one was around, waiting for her. The thought both frightened her and pulled her in, leaving her restless, caught between the safety of the life she had chosen and the temptation of something she couldn't yet name. The office was unusually quiet that evening. Most of the team had left early after a long day of meetings, leaving only the faint hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the old building settling into silence. Emma stayed behind, as she often did, her desk lamp casting a warm glow. Over the stack of reports she was determined to finish before heading home. She was so focused on her screen that she didn't hear the soft footsteps at first, but then a voice broke through the stillness, low, steady, and familiar. Long day. Emma looked up quickly, her pulse skipping as she found Daniel leaning casually against the desk beside hers. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, and for the first time he didn't look like the polished, untouchable professional she was used to seeing. He looked human, tired, real. She nodded, forcing a small smile. Feels like it never ends. For a few moments he said nothing, his gaze flicking to the papers in front of her before returning to her face. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. Exactly. But it carried weight, like he was searching for the right words and wasn't sure how far he should go. Emma's heart thudded in her chest. She tried to focus on her work, on the glowing lines of text on her computer. But the awareness of him standing there pulled her attention like a magnet. Finally, he spoke again, his voice softer this time, almost hesitant. "You work harder than anyone here. You ever wonder if it's worth it?" The question caught her off guard. She tilted her head, studying him. "What do you mean?" He shrugged lightly, his eyes holding hers. "Just. All these late nights, all this effort. Most people don't notice. But I do." Something in the way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't just about work, she realized. It was about her. Emma forced a laugh, though it sounded thin even to her own ears. "Well, someone's got to keep this place running." Daniel smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He leaned a little closer, lowering his voice as though he was sharing a secret meant for no one else. "Sometimes I wait for these moments when it's just us. Do you notice that?" Emma froze. The words hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. She wanted to pretend she didn't understand, to brush it off as nothing more than small talk. But deep down, she knew exactly what he meant. She had noticed every glance, every lingering pause. For every quiet exchange when the rest of the office wasn't watching, she had noticed it all. Her throat tightened. And for a moment, she couldn't find her voice. She should have said something, anything, too. Draw a boundary to protect herself, to protect Mark. But instead, she stayed silent. Her silence gave him permission. Daniel didn't press. He didn't move closer or say anything reckless. He simply remained where he was, his expression calm but his eyes intense. As though he was listening to everything she wasn't saying out loud, Emma's mind raced. She thought of Mark, of the comfortable life they had built, of the wedding invitations that were already sitting in a box at home. She thought of the years they had spent together, the promises they had made. And yet, here she was, sitting in the dimly lit office with another man, her heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. She cleared her throat, trying to break the tension. You shouldn't say things like that. Daniel tilted his head, his gaze steady. Why not? It's the truth. The simplicity of his response left her breathless. He didn't dress it up, didn't try to cover it with humor or excuses. He was telling her plainly, directly, that he sought her out, that he waited for these stolen moments. Emma turned back to her screen, though the words on it blurred. I'm engaged, Daniel. You know that. I know, he said quietly. And I respect that. I'm not trying to take anything away from you. I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel. The honesty in his voice unsettled her. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't push, it was raw, unguarded. And somehow that made it harder to resist. She shook her head, her fingers trembling slightly as she shuffled the papers on her desk. This isn't fair to me, to you, to Mark. I'm not asking for anything, Daniel said, his tone steady but his eyes filled with something deeper. I just needed you to know. Emma finally looked at him, and the intensity of his gaze nearly broke her. There was no judgment in his eyes, no expectation, only truth. A truth she had been running from, one she couldn't deny any longer. Her chest rose and fell as she tried to steady her breathing. Daniel? She whispered, but she couldn't finish the thought. He straightened, offering her a small, almost sad smile. I'll let you get back to your work.